Just another day on the beautiful shores of the urban Deer Creek. Look at that wonderful clear water. Hey, what are you kids doing playing in the creek?
Science! She blinded me with science!
So today we are here with the Bob Virag of Missouri Stream Teams and the Great Rivers Master Naturalist chapter. So Bob, what are you doing here today?
Well, today we're doing monitoring of Deer Creek. Adam and I have been doing this now for the past year or so, and we're following a long tradition of previous Stream Team volunteers monitoring here at Litzinger Road Ecology Center. This particular site is real critical right now, as you'll see. It's undergoing a lot of construction by MSD for a deep dig project, and we're trying to get as much data as possible before the actual tunnel comes through here. We're now on sample number 3 or 4 before that monitoring, before the big dig, and we're already starting to see some major changes. So we're kind of anxious to see what the data look like as a result of all of those. We're going to be looking today at water chemistry, macroinvertebrates, the flow of the water, which is almost none or none, and we'll do some visual surveying as well. We measure macroinvertebrates twice a year. These are aquatic insects in the water that are a real good measure of water quality. Everything else we do measures acute toxicity. I mean, if you're looking at chemistry, you're looking at the reading right now. But if you measure the number of macroinvertebrates or aquatic insects in the water, that's a pretty good indicator of overall long-range water quality. So that's a real good study. What we'll do is we'll use kick nets and kind of rouse them out of their sleep, pick them into the net, and then we'll pick them out and count them. And based on that count, then we can gauge how much water quality there is. What we'll find are things that are really sensitive to pollution, things like caddisflies and mayflies. Some things that are somewhat sensitive to pollution, like dragonflies and damselflies, crayfish and that. And then things that are totally immune to pollution, seems to be. You'll see leeches in there, you'll see aquatic worms in there, you'll see some of the flies in there, and things like that. So each one of those are given a priority rating, a grade, a mark. If we find 1 mayfly or 1,000 mayflies, we give that a 3 score. If we find 1 caddisfly or 1,000, we give it another 3. If we find a dragonfly, we give it a 2. If we find a leech, we give it a 1. And we add all those up, and that total then is an indicator of the quality of that water. This is amazing. There's no flow back there. I mean, this is actually still water. There's pools of water all over the place. It has not rained in 7 days, and all we have is standing water. Yet you can see the rain, the last rain we had 3-4 inch gully washers. It breached all of the banks here. All this erosion that's going on back here is evidence of all that. Wow. Look at those grocery bags up in the roots. That tells you how high the water was just a short week ago when we had those gully washers. And now this. So normally we do a discharge study, measure the flow of the stream in cubic feet per second. I'll bet we haven't got 1 cubic foot per second here. I've got all this gear to measure the width of the stream, the cross-sectional area of that slice, and we're going to time these balls going through. It's like, oh man, nothing here except this little ripple. This is nuts. But there's enough here to probably measure that really slow flow. Let's see if this thing moves at all. It might bounce along the bottom and stop. Let's see what happens. Yep. Oh, there we go. We do have flow. And a trained eye would probably tell you exactly what that flow is, but mine is not so trained in that. Wow. This could be tough. Yep. We may have to call this one. Oh, look. We have flow. That is a almost discernible flow. And it stops.
Getting hung up on a rock. There we go.
Don't breathe. Let's go a little deeper here. See what's going on down here. I guess that's what they call dead in the water. Normally we would measure the width of the stream and then pace out 10 feet and measure how long it takes that ball to float down that 10-foot scan. But in this case, we can't do that. So we're just going to do a micro flow thing and call it a day.
All right, Vivian, so part of our visual survey on this creek is measuring how embedded the cobble is in the creek bank. So what we're going to do is we're going to look in here and find us a good rock. Oh, this one looks perfect. We're going to pull it out. Nice piece. We got a nice piece of cobble here. I'm basically determining like how much sediment is in the bottom that's covering these rocks up, and you can see the water line here. So the lighter color on the bottom is where it was buried, and then you can see the algae growth on the top where it's all kind of slimy. So that tells us where our sediment line is in the creek. So this is a little over half of the rock that was buried underground, so I'm going to call it about 60% embeddedness. And we're going to take 5 of these and average them out. We're going to estimate the percentages and take an average of all 5, and that'll give us our estimation of embeddedness for this whole section of the creek.
So it looks like we have a female here. You don't see the V-shaped claspers behind the last appendages there. One of the most important things that we measure here in the creek is the amount of dissolved oxygen in the water. And that's really important, both for the plants and the animals that live here. A minimum of 5 parts per million of oxygen is what we aim for in these conditions, that in terms of measuring the minimum amount of oxygen that these critters can thrive in. And what we'll do is we'll pick out an area similar to this. And you look, you'll see a slight riffle going on. And the oxygen is picked up in that riffle. It's also picked up by the algae that's growing in the daylight. If you measure the oxygen in the afternoon, the algae will be throwing off through photosynthesis a lot of oxygen, and it should be fairly decent. If you did it first thing in the morning, however, after a long night of respiration, the plants liberate carbon dioxide, the oxygen level will be real low. So it's important to mark down the time that you do the study. It's also important to measure the temperature of the water, because we're looking for oxygen saturation, the percent of dissolved oxygen in the water. And that percentage will change with the temperature. As the temperature goes up, the saturation of water goes down, simply because the oxygen boils away. And what we'll do is we'll take a sample of the water, and we will then put 2 chemical reagents in the water that precipitate out the oxygen in the form of crystals. And then what we'll do is we'll fix that with the 3rd chemical that dissolves those solids into a nice yellow color. That yellow color is proportional to the amount of oxygen that's dissolved in that water. We'll then take that yellow sample, 5 mLs of it, and we will drop in and titrate in sodium thiosulfate, which will then react with that yellow and neutralize it to a clear color. With each drop of sodium thiosulfate, we measure 1 part per million of oxygen. In this particular case, as we drop through, you'll see that we measured 6 drops of sodium thiosulfate, 6 parts per million. And as we go back to the chart and we show what the percentage oxygen was, it was 75% saturated oxygen. So that's a pretty good indication that this water isn't getting oxygenated right now, because there's really no flow in this stagnant water.
So what we're doing now is we're measuring water transparency. So it has this very scientific instrument here, which is just a tube with this little patterned disc at the bottom called a Secchi disc. It's a standard method for measuring water clarity. What we do is we fill this water to the top, and we look in the bottom and determine whether or not we can see that Secchi disc. And then we measure the depth that we can see it, and that's a measurement of water clarity. So, can you see the disc?
What Adam didn't show you is if this is very turbid water, you won't be able to see that disc. You know, I can barely see it myself right now. And so what I do then is I let a little bit of water out.
Ah!
Oh, there, I see it now. Oh, I'm sorry. See, I wouldn't have done
Thanks a lot, Bob.
All right, so now we'll measure the nitrate in the sample of water. Here we put a cadmium solution in it to turn it purple. And here you can see it against a manual colorimeter pointed up to the sky here. What do you think? Is that about a 1.0?
Yeah, probably somewhere in there.
Or is it between 1.0 and 2.0? No, I would say 1.0, which isn't 0, but it's not too bad either. All right, we're going to measure ammonia now. So I put reagents in a blank and also the sample, and I'm going to measure the blank first. Let me wipe off my greasy fingerprints in that. And I'll zero out the meter with this one. Uh-oh. So that'll zero out the meter. And then I'll put in the sample, put the light shield on it, and measure the sample. 0.01, very low ammonia.
What's that mean, Bob?
It means there's almost no ammonia in there. So ammonia is a metabolite. I mean, it comes from decaying leaves and critters and other things. Also comes from the sediment that's being exuded from the stones and all that. So that's a pretty good indication. Too high in ammonia, of course, is toxic. And this shows that there's none, almost none. Now we're going to measure phosphate. I have the blank in there right now. And it reads 0. That zeroed out the meter. And now, again, I'll wipe my sample jar off, put the sample in there. I can see that it's a little blue, so there's probably some phosphate in there. Read it again. So 0.35.
And what's that mean?
Again, that's another nutrient that comes from decaying leaves, and that's up there, but it's probably okay. It turns out that phosphate is a critical element for blue-green algae to bloom. The algae takes off once that phosphate gets very, very high. So now that this is the end of summer and all that, this is probably a good time for algae to start growing, and it has the it has the proper nutrients to do that. All right, we're going to measure chloride now, which comes from sodium chloride, which comes from mostly road salt, although there's some natural chlorides that are present in the waterways. Road salt is a common pollutant. During the wintertime, you'll see the chloride spike to very, very high toxic levels, and even to the point where, in one case, the River de Pear last year, it was as salty as the Gulf of Mexico in River de Pear, probably because of a salt spill that happened. But this is a very important part because road salt chlorides are toxic, and then they have an acute toxicity, you know, that everybody can get wiped out on. All these macroinvertebrates that we saw can't tolerate levels that are above 600, 700, 800 parts per million. So I see a 3.4 on that. That's a relative measure that's unique to this particular lot of sticks. Has no other meaning. So we're going to now look at the label to see where 3.4 ends up on this chart. And I see that it corresponds at 116 milligrams per liter, or parts per million. 116 is very low. Is low enough to be able to be acceptable. If that were in the range of, I think, I should know these numbers, 280, it's a chronic toxicity, and it's in the 600s, it's acutely toxic. So we're well under that level.
Yeah, there goes the rest of the day.
Hazards of working in the creek.